Tensions are reaching unprecedented levels along the jagged and unforgiving mountains that divide Pakistan and Afghanistan. For decades, this border has been a line of conflict, mistrust, and unresolved grievances, etched deep into the region's history. The echoes of gunfire, once thought to be sporadic, now reverberate with alarming regularity, signaling a potential escalation that could engulf the region in violence. What we are witnessing today is not an isolated skirmish. It is a culmination of decades of political maneuvering, militant activity, and cross-border tensions that have remained unresolved since the withdrawal of international forces from Afghanistan. This is a line where civilians live in constant fear. Soldiers prepare for inevitable clashes, and entire communities brace for impact. The roots of this conflict trace back to the 19th century, when the British Empire drew borders through tribal lands, splitting families, cultures, and communities. Known as the Durand Line, this boundary has never been fully accepted by Afghanistan, and over the years, it has become a symbolic and literal fault line. The legacy of imperial decisions continues to haunt the region, creating conditions where mistrust and hostility are embedded in every negotiation, every patrol, and every checkpoint. In recent decades, the landscape of conflict has evolved. Afghanistan, after years of war with the Soviets and later with the US-backed forces, became a complex theater of political, religious, and military dynamics. Pakistan, meanwhile, faced repeated insurgencies, terrorist attacks, and a delicate balancing act along its western frontier. The latest chapter in this long saga is marked by increasingly frequent and deadly clashes along the border, threatening to destabilize not just the region, but global interests as well. The rise of the Taliban after the U.S. withdrawal in 2021 dramatically reshaped the balance of power in the region. Pakistan, historically both a mediator and a critic of Afghan governance, suddenly found itself confronting a new set of challenges. Militant groups such as the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, began exploiting the porous border, launching attacks inside Pakistan and retreating into the complex terrain of Afghanistan. The Pakistani government claims these incursions threaten national security, while the Taliban insist they are defending their sovereignty against alleged Pakistani violations, including airstrikes and artillery bombardments. These allegations are more than just political statements. They are part of a cycle of retaliation that has escalated into armed clashes. Border towns like Torkham, Chaman, and Spin Boldak have become the front lines, witnessing firefights that disrupt civilian life, halt trade, and strain already fragile diplomatic relations. Each confrontation adds layers to an already complicated scenario where historical grievances, tribal loyalties, and militant ambitions collide, producing a volatile mix that threatens to spiral beyond anyone's control. Meanwhile, intelligence reports indicate that both sides have significantly increased troop deployments along the frontier, bringing heavy artillery, armored vehicles, and sophisticated surveillance equipment. Satellite images and drone reconnaissance reveal fortifications being established along strategic points, signaling preparations not for temporary skirmishes, but potentially prolonged engagement. This militarization is alarming not only for the local population, but also for international observers, particularly the United States, which maintains a keen interest in the stability of South Asia. In October 2025, tensions erupted into open clashes. Pakistani forces reported eliminating dozens of militants along the Chaman sector, while the Taliban cited casualties among Afghan soldiers and local civilians. This outbreak of violence led to the immediate closure of key border crossings, paralyzing trade and leaving thousands stranded. Refugees, many carrying nothing but essential belongings, began a treacherous journey across mountainous terrain, seeking safety away from the crossfire. Families were forced to abandon homes, schools were shuttered, and entire communities came to a halt. The human cost of this conflict is immense, and yet it receives limited international attention compared to more prominent global crises. Military analysts point out that the fighting is not random but strategic. The Taliban and Pakistani forces are vying for control of key border checkpoints, trade routes, and supply lines. Controlling these points allows for not only tactical advantage, but also leverage in any potential negotiations. The mountainous terrain complicates these engagements, turning every skirmish into a deadly, drawn-out confrontation. Observers warn that each day of conflict increases the likelihood of a larger regional escalation, drawing neighboring countries into a wider confrontation. The United States watches closely as the situation unfolds, aware that instability along this border has implications far beyond South Asia. Pentagon sources confirm increased satellite surveillance, intelligence operations, and readiness assessments to anticipate potential escalations. The U.S. faces a delicate challenge. Direct intervention could trigger international backlash, yet inaction risks allowing the conflict to spiral, potentially enabling terrorist networks to regroup or drawing in other regional powers. From Washington to New York, policymakers debate the possible courses of action. Some advocate for diplomatic engagement, urging Pakistan and Afghanistan to honor ceasefires and engage in mediated talks. Others stress the importance of contingency planning, including intelligence sharing, logistical support, and potential strategic strikes to prevent the proliferation of militant forces. The situation is complicated further by global power dynamics, as China, India, and Russia each watch closely, weighing the potential economic and security implications of further instability. Looking forward, the possibilities are stark. One path leads to a peaceful resolution where ceasefires hold, negotiations advance, and diplomatic engagement prevents further bloodshed. Another path envisions prolonged conflict, with intermittent clashes, continued civilian suffering, and international powers forced to intervene in a limited capacity. The most severe scenario, full-scale war, would involve sustained military campaigns, extensive destruction, and possibly draw multiple nations into a regional confrontation. Tonight, as Pakistan and Afghanistan stand at the edge of war, the world watches with bated breath. America remains on alert, monitoring every development, analyzing every move, and preparing for contingencies. The mountains that have seen centuries of conflict now witness yet another chapter in a story defined by tension, strategy, and survival. The stakes have never been higher, and the outcome remains uncertain.
By the spring of 2026, what began as a tense courtroom moment between Judge Edith Jones and Representative Jasmine Crockett had transformed into something few in Washington could have predicted: a bipartisan movement for reform, transparency, and respect between America's branches of power. But even as the country celebrated their unlikely alliance, powerful forces were stirring. Not everyone was pleased with what their partnership represented. A movement takes shape. Following the success of the Judicial Partnership Act, Crockett and Jones continued to meet privately, refining their shared vision for restoring trust between the courts and Congress. They began hosting a series of policy dialogues, each one bringing lawmakers face to face with judges, public defenders, and prosecutors, groups that had rarely sat in the same room without tension. The first of these forums was held quietly inside the Library of Congress. Cameras were banned. The goal, Jones insisted, was honesty without performance. Over 24 members from both parties attended. What began as formal statements soon turned into raw conversation about sentencing reform, federal overreach, and the erosion of public faith in justice. Observers described the tone as unusually human. Judge Jones listened as lawmakers described political pressures. Crockett listened as judges spoke about legal constraints. By the end of the night, both sides had agreed to one thing: the system wasn't broken, it was misunderstood. And for a brief moment, Washington remembered what collaboration sounded like. Political firestorm. But not everyone welcomed the new tone. As media coverage of the Crockett-Jones collaboration spread, certain political strategists and advocacy groups saw danger in their unity. Critics from the far ends of both political spectrums began framing their cooperation as betrayal. Some accused Crockett of going soft on judicial power. Others accused Jones of politicizing the bench. Cable panels reignited the noise the two women had worked so hard to quiet. Commentators debated their motives. One viral post read, "In Washington, when two people from opposite worlds start agreeing, someone, somewhere is losing power." Threats and misinformation began to circulate online. Crockett's staff received anonymous letters accusing her of selling out. Judge Jones's chambers were flooded with demands for her resignation, but neither backed down. In a rare joint statement, they declared, "Respect is not surrender, listening is not weakness, and unity is not compromise. It is the only way forward." That quote was soon etched on posters, shared across schools, and even projected on the steps of the U.S. Capitol during a candlelight rally held in their support. The turning point. The backlash reached its peak during a tense congressional hearing on judicial ethics reform. Crockett was called to testify about her cooperation with federal judges, an unprecedented move that many saw as an attempt to humiliate her. Judge Jones, retired but still influential, attended silently in the audience. Cameras captured her calm, unwavering gaze as Crockett took the oath. When questioned about her relationship with the judiciary, Crockett responded firmly, "If talking to judges, understanding their challenges, and finding common ground is a crime, then I plead guilty. Guilty of trying to fix what's broken in this country." The room fell silent. Even her opponents looked unsettled. Judge Jones later told reporters that it was one of the proudest moments of her career, and it wasn't even mine. Within days, the backlash began to fade. What had started as political theater had turned into moral victory. Reform becomes reality. In June 2026, a sweeping new bill called the Federal Integrity and Transparency Act passed both chambers of Congress with strong bipartisan support. Drafted in part through insights from the Crockett-Jones dialogues, the bill introduced clearer ethical standards for judicial conduct, increased transparency in case funding, and expanded civic education on constitutional balance. It wasn't perfect. No law ever is. But for the first time in years, it passed without a single walkout, boycott, or partisan filibuster. Judge Jones, though long retired by then, was invited to the signing ceremony. Standing beside her, Representative Crockett handed the president the pen that would ink the bill into law. Cameras captured the moment. The older judge with silver hair and the young congresswoman with resolute eyes, both standing together under the seal of the United States. Reporters called it the photograph that defined a new political generation. Personal reflection. Months later, Crockett visited Houston to deliver a guest lecture at the University of Texas Law Center, the same institution where Judge Jones had once taught. Her speech, titled From Confrontation to Cooperation, drew a standing room-only audience. At the end, she paused, looked out over the crowd of young law students, and said, "That courtroom moment didn't humble me. It educated me. I learned that democracy doesn't fail when we argue. It fails when we stop listening. Judge Jones taught me that." Unbeknownst to many in the audience, Jones was seated quietly in the front row. When Crockett finished, she stood, applauded, and embraced her former adversary. The applause that followed lasted several minutes. The legacy they left behind. Years later, historians would refer to their story as the Crockett-Jones Doctrine, a principle rooted in dialogue, restraint, and civic respect. Political science textbooks began using their encounter as a case study in nonpartisan integrity. Documentaries chronicled the unlikely friendship between a conservative appellate judge and a progressive congresswoman. One particularly powerful quote from Judge Jones's final public interview summed it up. "If a courtroom can become a classroom and an argument can become understanding, then democracy still works." When Judge Jones passed away peacefully at age 77, Congress held a moment of silence in her honor. Representative Jasmine Crockett, now a senior committee leader, stood at the podium and said through tears, "She taught me that strength without grace is arrogance, and that justice without humility is blind. The gavel may have fallen, but her lesson echoes still." The chamber fell silent once more, not out of ceremony, but out of reverence. Epilogue. The final lesson. In the end, the story of Edith Jones and Jasmine Crockett was not about politics, race, or ideology. It was about something older, quieter, and infinitely more powerful. The idea that respect, once lost, can still be rebuilt. One judge, one lawmaker, one moment that reminded a divided nation that listening is not defeat. It is democracy in motion. As the final line of the PBS documentary that later chronicled their journey put it, in an age of noise, they chose to hear each other. And in doing so, they reminded America of its better self.